Thanks for joining us. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Very recently, we've heard the advent of generative AI and how it's changing businesses and your life. Joining us in the studio is Stephanie Leong, the Group Deputy Chief Investment Officer of StashAway. She's in town for the time being. She's from Hong Kong. StashAway, of course, is a brand that is familiar with many of you, particularly those that are watching this show. So it's actually a privilege and a pleasure to have Stephanie and the StashAway gang over talk about generative AI and personal finance. Stephanie, let's talk a little bit more about the idea of how generative AI in its current form still has some flaws and whether or not we can actually capture that whole potential of it and try to see how it applies to us through personal finance, investment, through robo-advisory, through ETFs. How do you see or how does StashAway approach generative AI in how you do your everyday business?
Sure, and thanks for having me on the show. I think generative AI is definitely a very, very exciting development that has just come up recently. In the past few months, we've seen kind of advancements in leaps and bounds. And at StashAway, we've actually always been paying attention to artificial intelligence technology. And in fact, in our investment framework or in our investment kind of engine, we have been employing some AI techniques already. So AI is not a new thing, but generative AI is definitely a new development in the area of artificial intelligence. And I think what we're seeing in generative AI is that everyday user, like you and me or people watching the show, you can very easily interact with the AI model by just, talking to the AI, having a conversation, asking questions, and having the AI do many different things for you. And I think in terms of investment, it's still very, very early days, but we do see some very interesting opportunities. For example, in terms of how we interact with our customers, in terms of how we do internal work, in terms of research, et cetera, et cetera. So it touches quite a wide variety of things. And I think all in all, it's very, very exciting.
The most advanced way of me particularly using ChatGPT is that when I present itself very strict rules on a particular phrase that I want, especially when it comes to evaluating whether or not the phrase is impactful or otherwise. And once I have figured out the best kind of rules to be imputed, then I give that phrase, then it gives me the best kind of result. This is actually a signal that, ChatGPT is only as good as us knowing what to impute it. And I tried it using, say, Bing Chat and all the other stuff that we have right now online, paid and unpaid. It also gives that kind of quality output, but it depends on how well we phrase our input. The question now is, when people use ChatGPT, they don't have the time or the energy or even the cognitive capability to actually create that kind of input. So they just ask blankly. And sometimes the response or the return is actually quite ridiculous. In fact, it can be untrue. Many times it is untrue. How do you ensure that these kind of situations are going to be managed accurately, particularly when people want to spend money on it, right? Asking for advice on personal finance and many more.
So this phenomenon is something called hallucination. And it's actually quite common around kind of these generative AI models. The reason being, if you think about the generative AI models, they're actually not doing computation. So what kind of goes on under the hood is that they try to predict what the most likely next words are going to be. And when they generate these answers, all they're trying to do is to associate different words and string them together. That's why it may give you kind of factually wrong answers, particularly when it comes to, for example, calculations. Even very, very simple calculations, when the engine actually does not know that it should use a calculator, it tries to predict it using the most likely words that come out, which is why you get sometimes wrong answers. Very, very recently, a New York attorney was trying to use ChatGPT to come up with court cases examples, and actually ChatGPT created a whole false court case that didn't exist. So these are examples of something called hallucination. Now, how do you kind of predict or prevent hallucinations from happening? Number one is to, of course, have very specific instructions for the AI model. For example, if you want it to calculate a mathematical problem precisely, you need to tell it to use a calculator. So instead of just asking like the AI, what is like 3 plus 5, ask it, use a calculator to do the following calculation for me. So as you mentioned, like giving very specific instructions. The other thing that's happening is that these AI models are also developing very quickly. For example, ChatGPT, OpenAI, I mean, they have tried to come up with ways to prevent hallucination from happening. So it wouldn't surprise me if, like, given time, we can actually see less and less of these hallucinations happening.
Mm-hmm.
As users, how
with
do we...
lesser input, I suppose.
With lesser input, et cetera, et cetera. And as users, I think there's something called prompt engineering, which is a whole kind of art form itself in how you phrase these questions. So a few tips is to be very specific, give it step-by-step instructions, and also double check, right? Because I was using ChatGPT as well to ask it to give me some sort of financial advice or predictions. The answer that it gives seems to be very legitimate, right? It's very believable. It seems very logical, but it's not actually true.
Yeah.
And if you are an expert in that field, you can tell it's not true immediately.
Yeah, but for the regular eye.
Exactly.
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Pause your thought, but when I ChatGPT tell me more about Notepad, they're like, the host, Ibrahim Sani, interviews some people that I have interviewed, some people I haven't, including Steve Jobs, Boutros Ghali, Nelson Mandela. I'm like, oh, hang on, you know, like.
Yeah.
So people don't know how to discern what is true and what is not, particularly when it melds the two item in between.
Exactly.
Anyway, yeah, go on. Sorry to interrupt.
Exactly. No, exactly. That is exactly why. I mean, at Stashaway, we've been looking at the technology and seeing how we can use it, but we've been also very careful and very cognizant of the fact that sometimes it makes up facts, and to a normal eye, it may not be so apparent. Yeah. So still a combination of using ChatGPT plus human input, I think is kind of the more prudent approach at this stage. But who knows, maybe in 12 months' time, we're going to get like much better.
I just joined a Telegram group on I guess, savvy personal finance investors, and they gave some templates in terms of the prompts that comes out that we can put inside ChatGPT, and then the variables up to us on what we want to put. This includes calculate the time value of money with interest fluctuating between, let's say, the first 5 years this rate averaging, the next 5 years this rate averaging, and then of course we have there's a sidewinder kind of moments like assuming there's a COVID next time around, like let's say a decade from now, and then of course the interest rate drops to near zero. All that comes in, and then suddenly the thing comes out pretty nice. And it's a lot better than using a financial calculator and calculate, compounding interest over 10 years, because you don't have these kind of factors in.
Sure.
But that is what I'm trying to say. The level of sophistication, particularly when we know what we want, we understand the kind of variables that we're looking at, and of course the kind of possible or realized solutions that we're looking at the end. But not many people know how to do that. Does Stashaway have that kind of, I guess, a template that you guys work on?
So yeah, in my everyday research right now, I also use ChatGPT. But as you said, I have to give it very specific prompts. It's very good at giving you, like helping you in looking up for facts that are universal truths. Like for example, like how do you calculate compound interest?
That's
right?
That's a straightforward.
I mean,
there's only one answer to it.
So there's only one answer, and it doesn't require like many different steps. When you want to ask ChatGPT for more sophisticated answers, you need to break it down into steps. So for example, if I want to calculate like how much I need to retire, firstly I ask it, what is the formula for calculating compound interest? And then after it does that, and then I said, use that formula to help me to calculate these inputs. So you need to break it down into like smaller steps for that.
All right. Let's qualify you for a bit. You have had 17 years of experience managing multi-asset portfolios. You've worked with Goldman Sachs before, with institutional investors as well as family offices. You also started off your career with McKinsey. And of course, these are quite, what I call this, impressive kind of background.
Yeah.
However, changes are happening to a point where I'm pretty sure 17 years ago you didn't even realize this could be it. Or people talk about it, right? Like, when I was in CIMB, people are talking like, one day AI will change how we do things.
Sure.
The day is today.
Yeah.
So are you psychologically ready to embrace these kind of changes?
Yeah, it's funny. So even though it's 17 years in the investment industry, every day is new. because although history rhymes, it never repeats. So I think that's the excitement, or kind of that's why I enjoy being in the investment industry, is that you learn new things every day. Just like you, I think you kind of.
I mean, talk about pivoting, right?
Exactly, right. I think I mean, there's new things that are happening in the world every day, and it's up to us to interpret what's going on, distill what's important, and make investment decisions based on that.
Right. Let's zoom into some of the practical applications when it comes to personal finance and our understanding of ETFs and robo-advisory.
Sure.
How has Stashaway utilized the data and algorithms right now to inform your investors or try to build investment decisions that can actually be a little bit more value added compared to not using generative AI?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, I mean, we've been using AI technologies in our investment engine, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's generative AI, because AI has been around for 20 years. When I was in university, I actually studied AI. Of course, the AI back then was very, very different from the AI today. But still, like within AI, there are some techniques like clustering, hierarchical kind of just kind of clustering that are very relevant to AI and also practically been used in investment for a long time. So I think what we've done is to build an engine that makes use of some of these techniques. But the fundamental, I guess, the engine or the philosophy of the investment engine is that we take top-down macro inputs. So we look at all the economic data out there and try to distill it into different regimes. Like these regimes would be categorized in terms of growth and inflation. So for example, today in the US, what we're seeing is slowing growth and still a fairly high inflation regime. So this is categorized as a stagflation regime. And what we do is then, I mean, we look at the different asset classes and how they perform in these different regimes in terms of returns and also downside risk. And we optimize our portfolio according to the different regimes. So for example, just very simply, a lot of people have maybe a diversified portfolio of 60% equities, 40% bonds. But actually, equities and bonds perform very differently under different regimes. When growth is good, inflation is low, you should have more equities, right? Less stocks. But when we're going into recession, that's when like the proportion of bonds should be increased versus equities. So these changes actually don't happen every day, which is why, I mean, we don't trade every day. But when it happens every few years, it's a very significant change that everybody should actually adjust to their portfolios.
So how does this migration work in terms of how you've been doing things, particularly at Stashaway? You've been doing this for quite a bit now. How do you now ensure that the kind of variable changes is going to be captured quite optimized in an optimized fashion using AI, considering that there's a lot more that can be done in terms of getting results from AI, but at the same time, there's a lot more variables that you have to manage.
Yes.
Yeah, so how do you move towards that transition before, after?
Yeah, so I think the way we're using generative AI right now is more in the research process. So, because I mean, at Stashaway...
It's exciting then.
Yeah, exactly. And I think at Stashaway, one of our value propositions is that in your investment, you should always keep costs very low. And that's why, I mean, we only charge a very low kind of 0.2 to 0.8% management fee. We don't charge any other extra fees. Versus, for example, you buy a mutual fund, today it still charges you 1 to 2%, right? And there's like all kinds of different fees. And the way that we keep our costs low, where we can pass on to our customer, is that we be very efficient in how we run the investment process. So for example, when you buy a mutual fund selects stocks, right? And to select stocks, you need to do a lot of fundamental research. You need to hire a lot of people. And these people are usually quite expensive. So the great thing about generative AI is that when it helps us in our research process, we don't need to have like a very, very big research team. We can use AI to help a few people to kind of conduct the whole research process and come up with like the recommendations. And I think this is kind of where it helps a lot in terms of the investment results, because the lower the cost we can keep, I mean, the more we can pass on to our customers. And I think right now, that's where I see kind of the most benefit.
When Stashaway first started off, and ETFs for that matter, there was a conversation that I used to have with folks like you in terms of would this drive consumer behavior to opt into more and more ETFs and less into picking up stocks per se. You know, at that point in time, it was more of a wait and see. Fast forward 10 years, 15 years down the road, it seems like there's a market for both. And it doesn't mean that there's a over leverage of the market towards ETFs and less reliance on picking individual stocks. But clearly there are people who want to bet big on a particular stock. That's not my kind of way of doing things because I'm not into the investment world. I'm into the TV show. and I don't want to be thinking about stocks every day, right? So I rely on you guys a lot. So where do you see this trend continuing? Will the market still be existent for both, or do you think that ETFs will grow even more and therefore, in a way, direct more funds into these kind of investments and depriving the individual stocks of capital from the market?
So I think, I mean, definitely is two very different ways of investing and building a portfolio. There are success cases in both
of course.
ways, right? Warren Buffett is a great example. He himself, I mean, does like very selective stock picking, but he also advised people who are not in the investment industry to just go buy S&P ETFs. And I think the difference is when you think about building your portfolio, how much time, how much effort can you spend on looking at individual stocks?
Yeah, and be honest with yourself.
Because yes, exactly.
I over-exaggerate my own estimations, and in the end, I'm like, no, I can't do this.
And most of us do that too, right?
I can do no problem.
Exactly.
No.
I know what's going on with the industry, with the company. I can study the balance sheets.
I'm inside. No,
I can be a Warren Buffett, but there's only one Warren Buffett for a reason, right? For most of us, if we don't have time, but we still want to benefit from the earnings growth of like various companies and also benefit from the coupons that you get from, or the income that you get from fixed income instruments, having a very well-diversified portfolio through ETF, I think, is the most stress-free and the easiest way. And I think this is a trend that we've seen going on, particularly in developed markets. For example, in US or in Europe, not just individual investors, but pension funds. These very, very big institutions are also using ETFs as their building blocks for the asset allocation portfolios because it's very straightforward. And also, I mean, just a recent example. Year to date, this year, if you look at the S&P, right, it's up quite a lot, almost 20%. But if you take away the top 7, 8 stocks,
that's right,
it's actually flat.
Yeah.
So ask yourself, actually, would you have the insight to pick those 7 and 8 stocks, or would you be kind of investing, more likely to be investing in the rest of the 493 stocks? Because if you had invested in the rest of the stock market, you wouldn't see like the good returns. So the only way to get that 20% return is either by investing in a broad-based ETF or a broad-based index, or by being invested in those like 7, 8 stocks. The much easier way, of course, is to stay invested in the ETF itself instead of having to pick the stocks.
Okay. Let's now look into comparison between the geographies that you operate in. Being the group CIO right now, it's also important for us to compare and contrast the consumer behavior that exists in all these markets that we operate in. But just to qualify and preface, much of your ETFs are in developed markets, in China, and therefore I guess the kind of where the consumers come from might not necessarily be applicable. Am I correct? Or?
Yeah, I mean, our geographies are, so our headquarters is in Singapore. Malaysia is actually our second biggest geography. We also have 3 newer markets in Thailand, in Hong Kong, as well as in the UAE. So all our different geographies actually have the same kind of, or very similar global asset allocation portfolio. So our portfolios are predominantly invested in US. Given that, of course, the US is the biggest economy and it represents 60% of the global market cap in terms of equities, and also a very significant portion of the fixed income market as well. And we also have exposure to other developed markets. For example, year to date this year, we have over allocated to Japan, and also we have some exposure to emerging markets. So it's a kind of a good mix of a lot of different asset classes. Reason being that if you want to build a portfolio, diversification actually helps in terms of maximizing return while minimizing kind of the risk and it's proven in many research, and this is actually one of the things that actually won a Nobel Prize for the optimization for a diversified portfolio. So I think given our different geographies, still, you want to be a bit diversified out of your home country, because a lot of investors actually have this home country bias where just invested.
Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah.
Honestly, because quite frankly, there's a lot more money to be gained outside. Yes. Just open your eyes.
Exactly, open your eyes. Like you're not just tied to.
We can't deny this
domestic.
home country bias. We just can't deny it.
Yes, exactly. So I think StashAway provides a very easy way to have a much more globally diversified portfolio, and it benefits customers in different geographies.
Okay, let's look at the mood or the sentiment of consumers in these different geographies. Are they behaving, I guess, similarly across these countries? I wouldn't assume so. Where do you see the kind of nuances that lie between these customer preferences? Do they like fixed income a little bit more than, say, for instance, thematic?
Yeah.
What is the kind of variations that you see from these kind of geographies? Oh, and age group within the geographies.
Yes. So in general, our customers are kind of within the age of like 20 to 45. And I would say that for example, in Hong Kong, we see like an older cohort, but in Malaysia, it's younger. I would say that also in terms of risk preferences, it's, of course, a younger population, or the younger customers have a higher risk profile, which makes sense, right? If you have like a longer time horizon, you can take on more risk. Yeah. Recently, we've seen a significant interest in our cash management products, just because short-dated interest rates have risen a lot, right? So in the US, for example, if you buy very short-dated US Treasuries, these are like 1 to 3 months US Treasuries, they actually give you an interest rate of 5.3%.
Within 3 months,
which is very, very attractive, because these are risk-free rates. These are US Treasuries, they're not going to default. And you're getting fairly, I guess, reasonably rewarded for being in that asset class. So we're seeing a lot of interest in these kind of shorter dated cash management products. Thematics, I think this has always been kind of on people's radar. I think recently we don't see as much interest as in, let's say, 18 months ago. But actually, if you look at valuation of a lot of these tech companies, they have come down a lot. So I think what some of the great investors like to say is also that when there's greed in the market, you should be very fearful, and there's fear in the market, you should be greedy. If you look at some of these thematic stocks, right now there's not much interest in the market, so maybe it makes sense to take a look. Maybe.
Of course, we're not soliciting for funds here, but generally speaking, where do you see, I just want to pick your brains because we only have about 5 minutes left.
Sure.
Interest rates are rising, discretionary spending is decreasing, inflationary rates are, of course, increasing as well. People are thinking more about putting food on the table, perhaps switching jobs or trying to find income elsewhere.
Yeah.
Where does the priority in terms of investment, particularly long-term investment, lie in the thought process or the frontal lobe of our customers right now?
Sure. Yeah, I think, investment is something that should be on everybody's mind. And the earlier that you start, the better. Of course, not everybody has the kind of a big pool of initial capital to start with, but it doesn't matter. If you are young, I think time is actually on your advantage, because we spoke a little bit about compound investing. This is actually the best thing in investment. One reason why, for example, Warren Buffett is so rich, because he started investing when he was 18 years old.
He had a time machine, he went to the future,
exactly,
and he came back, obviously.
Exactly. Well, if you start to invest early, your compound interest is going to grow exponentially. So start early, even though you're going through maybe tougher times. If you have some spare cash, start to invest. I think that's number one. Number two is to think about your risk appetite before you start your investment, because I think long-term investing requires sitting through some economic tough times, and inevitably we will go through that. If you look at stocks or bonds as a class, they always go up like this in the long term. However, in the short term, you always kind of go through some ups and downs. And what a lot of investors actually miss out on, the reason why they can't enjoy that kind of long-term return is when there are downs, you cut loss, right? You kind of give up and you think, oh, actually I don't know what I'm doing, investment is too risky, not for me, so I take all my money out. And they miss out on the long-term bull run. But by understanding your risk appetite at the beginning, like before you invest, you can sit through these market volatilities. And I guess one thing that we try to do at StashAway is that we try to help our investors to quantify what kind of risks you should take. So that when you invest in StashAway, you can sleep at night and you can actually sit through these like market volatilities. The last thing I'll say is that look for opportunities elsewhere, right? Even though, let's say, Malaysia may be going through tougher times, there are other economies that are going through kind of much better times.
Yeah,
One example,
the home buyers market.
Exactly, right? The US market is still booming. Technology stocks are having a great time. Japan is actually also another very interesting geography that we look at. So, I mean, all these things are available for investors in Malaysia. So think more abroad. So I would say, I mean, those three things are things that our listeners or investors should think about.
Okay, these are extremely nuggets of gold, particularly when you have a lot of longer-term horizon and the younger cohort watching us on digital and on demand, clearly.
Yes.
But there are mature audiences that watch us on TV right now, and they might not necessarily have that kind of long-term horizon. What would be some of the advantages that you can think of when we want to share these kind of tips with them, knowing that they have 5 to 10 years maybe in terms of horizon?
Sure. I mean, actually 5 to 10 years is also quite long, right? If you think about stock returns, let's say take the global stock market, which has been returning on average 80-10% per year for the past 50 years or so. So 80-10% per year, in 7 years, you can actually double your investments already. So in 5 to 10 years, you can actually still make pretty good returns if you stay invested. And also, of course, build a diversified portfolio using the different asset classes and ETFs.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Stephanie. That's Stephanie Leong, the Chief Investment Officer of StashAway, joining us all the way from Hong Kong, making the trip to KL. If you want to learn more about this, just head on to their website, find out more there, as well as on astrawin.com, find out more there as well. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Catch you in the next one.